So today we're going to go through bank accounts, payment methods, direct debits and direct credits. This topic largely covers parts of FinPower Connect that are available with the Advanced Banking add-on, which facilitates the automatic creation of bank transactions, and the ability to export these by creating a file. The client can then manually import the file into their banking application and the importing of bank transactions into FinPower Connect. For example, automatic payments that have been direct credited to the company's real bank account and dishonoured transactions. FinPower Connect also now supports web-based API banking and payment interfaces. The first service to be implemented is Zepto, formerly known as Split, and is currently only available in Australia. There are many advantages of web-based APIs over a file-based interface, which include speed. Direct credit payments using Zepto can occur in seconds as an example, and ease of use. They also provide the ability to track the transaction, updating its status, confirming success, or reporting a failure or dishonour. We won't be going over Zepto in depth today, but there is a document on its way out, and I believe the current expert in Australia is Denny. You're welcome, Denny. In terms of FinPower Connect, there's quite a few moving parts to the bank account and associated processes. Shown here is a bit of a relationship diagram showing some of the key points throughout FinPower Connect that are involved. As you can see, there is quite a few links here, which mean careful configuration is required. Bank accounts are used for payment and bank transaction entry. They're also used when importing bank transaction information and, as mentioned, exporting transactions, like outgoing direct credits and incoming direct debits. All bank transactions use the definitions set up in the bank accounts form, and each bank transaction uses a predefined payment method which ties it to the bank account. Your company or entity can have more than one bank account that transactions are passed through, and each bank account must have its own set of unique payment methods to distinguish which bank account transactions should be posted to. It is important to note that a bank account can only be linked to one entity. Or belong to one entity, rather. Again, this is an area that differs between database countries, showing applicable services and configuration based on the country set. For example, New Zealand shows services for relevant New Zealand banks and direct debit processing companies for the importing and exporting of transactions using those specific file formats, which we'll go through in a little more depth shortly. Bank account configuration. So the bank account is another one of FinPower Connect's admin libraries and is therefore located in the admin menu. To start off the configuration of said bank account is of course our general page. Here we can set our code and description as normal. We typically see bank account codes showing an abbreviation of the relevant bank in the real world and the suffix of the real world bank account that they apply to. For example, ANZ.00, especially where a company requires more than one, such as in a database with multiple entities, but the code can be anything that the company finds meaningful. Next is the bank account details themselves. The banks available in the applicable country will appear to select under the short name field. For example, these are the ones available in New Zealand. And the full bank account number needs to be entered into the account number field. And the entity is also required to be linked here, and the cost centre, which is used to record associated calls or costs for any third-party API integrations, like the previously mentioned Zepto. On the options page, there is the ability to define the desired calendar for banking and processing. We covered calendars in a previous session, but for distinction, the difference between these two is as follows. The banking covers the days the bank is physically open, and processing covers all the days the bank can process transactions. This can also be overridden by a specific service if required. The GL account and suspense are also linked here for those exporting to the GL, and other options include the ability to allow direct debits to be processed on any date rather than being restricted to the next business day, and cash register and cheque related options. Cash registers have their own admin library, and are a facility to more accurately report where money is received from and paid out to where appropriate. If the require cash register when entering transactions option is ticked, it will make entry of a cash register mandatory for payment methods that use a cash register, like in this example here, and allow for selection by cash register when committing a bank lodgement. The option affects the following forms: account payment, account refund, account withdrawal, account close, bank entry, and edit bank transaction. The require cash register on lodgement option will, if ticked, will make an entry of a cash register mandatory when committing a bank lodgement, and we won't really cover checks today because for the most part checks aren't, as I understand it, commonly used today. Moving on to payment methods. As mentioned, payment methods are unique to the bank account, and therefore, if more than one bank account is required, multiple payment methods of a payment type will also be required. They're linked to a payment type, as mentioned, a flow direction of either incoming or outgoing, and of course, the bank account itself. An import or export service then links the payment method as shown by this simple diagram here. There are 9 different payment types to choose from when creating a new payment method in Australia and 8 in New Zealand. These assist with what fields are available throughout FinPower Connect where appropriate, like the format required for entering information when adding a credit card to a client's banking record. These are cash, cheque, bank account, token, American Express, Diners Club, MasterCard, Visa, and POS known as EFTPOS. In Australia, the extra type is, of course, Zepto, formerly known as Split, and you'll see that as an additional page on the bank account if you're in an Australian database. Payment methods are simple to create. Simply head along to the payment methods page and select the add item button on the button strip below the grid and follow the wizard through. The summary below the grid is useful as it shows which options have been saved on the payment method without needing to drill down into it. As you can see from our sample list here, you can have multiple payment methods of the same underlying type, which is necessary so that you can have one each for incoming transactions and outgoing, such as direct debits and direct credits. There are additional options you can set at the payment method level, such as whether it's available for selection in the new account wizard, the account payment details wizard, the account payment wizard, or whether or not it can be used to pay disbursements. This adds an additional level of control, over certain methods. For example, in New Zealand, you wouldn't want the user to be able to select a credit card like Visa, MasterCard, or American Express as a method to make loan repayments, as it is not allowed. You can choose whether to charge a fee, like a credit card processing fee as an example, with a range of different options available, such as a percentage of the transaction value, set a default reference, and the number of business days to treat the transaction as uncleared funds. And finally, direct debit specific options, such as whether to combine with other payment methods for the same main client, which is all payments including promises, etc., and the subsequent options you can select if you only want specific scenarios to combine. You can also set rescheduled days if applicable, and some additional information written in HTML to appear as additional information for this payment method if you're using a portal. Okay, and import services. So this is where you can add in the import service the client requires, and then, as mentioned, go on to link a payment method. We have several inbuilt services already, which can be configured by running through the Add Pre-configured Service wizard, which you'll find here. As you can see here, we already have an ANZ Direct already added in, which is linked to the bank account import transaction type and the AP automatic payment method. If we wanted to add an additional source for importing, we would go into edit mode and then click on this wizard and select from the drop-down service list the service we would like to add. Which format is required stems from the client's bank and what they're able to export from their banking software. We have a number of commonly used formats available for both Australia and New Zealand. Obviously, these are the New Zealand ones that are available, but if you're in an Australian database, you'll see a different list. Where we don't have an existing exportable or importable function, we can add a job for development to consider building this in or quote to create a custom export or import. If we have a look at adding this service on the first page, we have the ability to define any scripts if necessary. On the second page, we can preset the file name, conventions, and location. If you right-click, you can insert these smart tags. For example, you could select the database folder, and you could select this one here, which represents year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds, for those that don't know. And it's particularly useful if you're doing some testing and you want unique file names so that you can continue to export without overwriting. Next, you can set the transaction type. Oh, sorry, I might have jumped ahead. No. Right, sorry. You can also select actions to do with these once imported, such as moving to a folder or deleting, and how to match. On the next page, you can then go through and select your transaction type, which in this case would be bank import, and then link it to your payment method. You can then go on to apply any rules that you wish to happen on import. These rules are really handy because there are often several transactions on a company's bank statement that you have no need to import. So you can tweak these settings so that it only imports transactions that are relevant. If we have a look at the import rule settings, you can see we can set things here like the transaction codes, whether it's a positive or negative value, which account classes are able to be matched, and if necessary, overriding values for element and payment method for transactions that meet the rules criteria. The bank match option defines whether or not the bank match will be updated once the transaction is committed, and you have the option to reverse the value of the import if needed. Once added, you can use the test import function to check that the file you wish to import is going to work without actually running the import bank transactions wizard. A note on this, however, if you have a script linked, this will process even if using the test import function, so something to be aware of. Onto the export services. As with the import services, if we don't have an existing exportable format, we can add a job for development to consider building it in or quote to create a custom export. The most recent format to be added was Batcho, which I believe is a Westpac bank format for exporting direct debits and credits. To add an export service, you use the same wizard as before and select the relevant service. Going through the wizard is a simple process. But you will need to know a few things about the external bank setup in order to ensure the configuration is correct for some of the services. This, of course, differs from service to service, but if we have a quick look at this one here, you can see you can set an export prefix. That's where you'd link your scripts. Here, they're asking you for a batch number. Other services may request a reference ID, client number, things like that. You can also set the reference here for the defaults, and on the next page, again, the transaction type, which for a direct debit likely going to be withdrawal, and then linking the payment method handled by this service. Once you've got all this configured, you can actually process the transactions. So for example, direct debits, the transaction itself is created by the account processor where the account has a payment method of direct debit. And once that part is done, you can go to the transactions menu and go to process direct debit payments. All of the ready to process direct debits will appear here. And once you click the finish button, it'll offer to export those automatically for you. In the Export Bank Transactions wizard, you go through and you select your service, and then you can go on to, well, in this case, there we go. You can go through and actually export that file. Obviously, this one doesn't have a pre-saved locations stored. But that will go through and commit those, ready for export. You can choose to print a summary of those, and your file will be saved in the external to FinPower Connect location, ready for you to upload to the banking system to process those payments. Just briefly wanted to touch on examples of some customization. So you saw we could link some scripts in there. I won't go into too much detail, but just some examples of customizations that we have seen come through is things like dishonor imports. So you can choose to have a script there to also undertake some additional actions when importing those dishonored transactions, for example, starting off a workflow if those aren't already covered by overdue rules on an account, as an example. Other customizations include getting a general script to run these processes automatically, as an example, overnight or at 2 points in a day, so that an actual human doesn't have to go through and process the direct debit wizard, as an example. That's all I have for today, but please, if there's any additional information you seek, don't hesitate to contact us at Application Support for user interface queries or code support in relation to code-specific questions.